All right, Dalton, our number one tight end in college football. Not much of a debate for either of us. It is Colston Loveland out of Michigan. What makes him, in our opinion, by far the number one tight end in the country right now?
A little bit of everything. It's one of the few times we don't have to argue, Max. Feels good. No, he is a more fluid athlete. You know, the PFF gas at 98.8 almost doesn't do it justice. There is not another tight end in the country that moves like Colston Loveland, man. It's just, for me, the agility and his ability to turn his hips is unmatched by the rest. It's not even close with the rest of these tight ends, man. He can run routes that no other tight end in the country can run. Talk about getting in the slot, running slants and out routes and things like that, even whip routes. Like, I think about like Travis Kelce for as long as his prime has been going, running whip routes like that, and just everything that the great tight ends do in the receiving game, Colston Loveland can do. It's just, he is so fluid. He gets downfield. He was 7 for 7 on deep targets last year for a 99.9 deep grade that tied for best in the country. The only Power 5 tight end with 20-plus targets who is top 5 against man and zone. Just so diverse, so efficient, 5th in yards and yards per route run. There's really, when you talk about the receiving game, there's nothing he can't do. He can get downfield. He can get across the field. He can turn on an absolute dime. His agility and his route running at the top of his routes has corners turning and bailing and doing all sorts of things, man. He's a completely different animal than the rest of the tight ends that we've talked about. It's so clearly number one that he would have been the second tight end taken behind Brock Bowers in this previous draft. And I don't see any reason, at least in the receiving game, that Loveland should be slowing down this year, other than Michigan has to figure out the quarterback situation. But even if it is not on the level of what J.J. McCarthy was the last couple of years, Colston Loveland should be the number one weapon in that offense, at least in the passing game, by far.
Yeah, I think he clearly would have been tight end 2 last year behind Brock Bowers, and I think he's going to be a first-round pick, man, in next year's draft. I really do. And it's kind of a big projection whenever you talk about tight ends because, you know, they rarely go in the first round nowadays. But I think Colston Loveland is good enough to do it, man. I really do. He was the 4th most valuable tight end, according to our wins above average metric last year. He was 5th among all tight ends with 649 receiving yards as well. You mentioned the elite athleticism at 6'5", 245 pounds, almost a 99th percentile athlete. And that movement ability, man, makes him nearly unguardable. He had an 88.7% open target rate last year, which is the 95th percentile for all tight ends in the country. So I love Colston Loveland, man. He really does just move differently than all tight ends out there. I mean, there were a couple plays where he had a post route, and like you said, he just leaves corners grasping for air out there. I mean, man, it really is ridiculous how this guy moves out there, and the movement ability he has is absolutely absurd. So, yeah, I think he is a special player. What are the negatives, though, Dawn, with Colston Loveland that you see?
I think in general, I think there's two things. One, he had 5 drops last year, which was the 6th most in the country. And I think otherwise, it's just about being more physical, right? Right around a 65 run blocking grade, but he didn't have to do it quite as much with A.J. Barner in the fold last year at Michigan, who was one of the best run blockers in the country. And I think even just being more physical after the catch, you can just see he's more of an athlete than the big bruising tight end that we've seen on our list. And obviously in the past, we think about like Luke Lachey as like a really physical player like that at Iowa, as they all are over there. But no, I think just being more physical in general, maybe put a few more pounds on if he can keep that same athleticism. But there isn't a whole lot to poke holes in. He just has to catch the football and get a little more physical and let the athleticism take him to the promised land. Because this guy, like you said, as the easiest bet for a first-round pick among the tight ends this year. He is just different. He's just different than the rest of them. He really is. He's the full package. He's efficient. He's athletic. He's fast. His routes are completely unmatched among this next year's tight end class. I think just a little bit more physicality in his game would make him an absolute freak.
Yeah, I think got to get more physical. I mean, he has a 10% drop rate in his career, which is 26th percentile among tight ends. He was in the 47th percentile this past season in contested catch percentage at about 46% as well. So got to get better in that aspect too. And then as a run blocker, he was, I think, 136th in the country at about 210 tight ends. total. So got to get better as a run blocker. And I actually, when we're scouting him earlier and we're putting together this list, I watched a lot of his run blocking plays. He actually does a pretty good job at the second level of taking on linebackers, safeties, and corners. The problem is, though, when he takes on defensive linemen, they just toss him aside, really. And I think that's a big part of why his run blocking was so low, because when he does play in line, he doesn't really do as well. But you put him in the slot, and he's able to get to the second level and take on players who are smaller. He's able to seal them off at least, which is, I think, that's good enough at least. There are positives to see in his run blocking at times, but he's just not strong enough right now to take on defensive linemen and seal them off from that. There are plenty of times on his tape where defensive linemen, like, he get a good his pad level was pretty good on the defensive lineman, and they literally would just like ragdoll him and toss him aside. Like, it really was. So I think his strength is a problem right now at 245 pounds, and but other than that, man, he's just a freak athlete, which is why, as like you put it really well, they just add a little bit of strength, and that should unlock a lot more to his game. But Colston Loveland, our number one tight end in college football heading into 2024 pretty clearly, and could be a first-round pick in the 2025 NFL draft. So make sure you learn the name.